Today I'm going to tell you a story about a man shunned by an entire town, a child no one's sure belongs to him, and a woman carrying a past heavy enough to bury a lifetime. One autumn night in 1874, as a blizzard swept across the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, a lone cowboy rode through the storm and knocked on the door of a stranger's house, cradling a newborn who hadn't even been given a name. His eyes were hollow, his hands trembling, not just from the cold, but from the truth clawing at him hour by hour. The woman who answered, "O disgraced matchmaker, the last person on earth brave enough to ask, 'Do you need help?' And the answer was, 'We'll take you on a journey you won't be able to walk away from.'" Rain pummeled the hills of Sierra Nevada with a fury that seemed unnatural for autumn. The golden grass, once crisp and proud in the midday sun, lay flattened under sheets of silver water. It was a storm that came without warning, riding the wind like an outlaw hell-bent on vengeance. In the distance, a figure on horseback emerged through the haze, a man hunched against the rain, his coat soaked through his hat, limp with water. But it wasn't his shape, or even his limp, that made the scene so stark. It was the small bundle in his arms. Swaddled tightly against his chest, the newborn barely moved its faint cry, lost in the roar of the wind. Thomas Crane didn't remember the last time he'd prayed. He didn't believe in redemption or second chances, but he believed in shelter. And he knew this storm would drown them both if he didn't find one soon. At the edge of a wooded ridge tucked behind a weathered barn stood a modest clapboard house. Smoke curled from the chimney, bending in the wind like it too was trying to escape. Thomas reined in his horse, dismounted with care, and staggered up the porch steps. His boots left dark, wet imprints on the worn planks. He raised a fist and knocked 3 slow, deliberate thuds. Inside, Mara Densmore paused mid-step. She had been rearranging the dried lavender near the hearth, trying to tame her restlessness, when the knock came. It was too late, too cold, too violent a storm for a visitor. Heart lurching, she wiped her hands on her apron and moved toward the door. When she opened it, the past stepped in with the storm's ace. "Oh, Thomas." She breathed, her voice barely audible over the wind. He didn't speak. His eyes were hollow-rimmed with red, his jaw clenched. In his arms, the baby whimpered. Mara stepped aside without a word. The storm pushed him forward, like a final shove. He crossed the threshold, boots, dripping coat trailing water, and laid the child carefully in the padded armchair near the fire. The warmth coaxed a faint movement from the baby, a twitch of fingers, a breathy sigh. Thomas reached into his coat and pulled out a crumpled envelope. He didn't look at her as he handed it over. Her hand shook. The ink had run in places, but she recognized the writing instantly. Sarah. The name hit her like a blow. Her sister's name had not been spoken in nearly a year, not since the last letter full of vague promises and desperate hopes. Mara tore the envelope open with trembling fingers and scanned the brief lines. It wasn't long, barely a note, just a plea. "If something happens, please go to Thomas. Help him. Help the baby." Mara swallowed hard. Her chest tightened as she looked at the child again. Thomas still hadn't spoken. "You should sit," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. He shook his head. "I'm fine." "You're soaked." "I said I'm fine." She said nothing more. She crouched beside the baby, gently lifting the edge of the blanket. A girl, barely weeks old, skin pink, and warm dark lashes against impossibly pale cheeks. Her little hand clutched the corner of the blanket, strong for something so small. Mara didn't say what she was thinking. She didn't say that the girl looked exactly like Sarah. Did Thomas know? She watched him out of the corner of her eye. How he wouldn't meet her gaze, how his shoulders stayed tense even near the fire. He hadn't called the baby by name. He hadn't said she was his daughter. Mara stood and moved to the hearth. "I'll warm some broth. You both need it." He didn't stop her. He only stared at the fire, his eyes flickering like the flame. Outside, the storm thundered louder, wrapping the cabin in sound. Rain drummed on the roof. Wind howled through the eaves. But inside, the silence was heavier. Mara poured broth into a cup, hands moving on instinct, though her mind raced. What had happened to Sarah? Why had she died? Where had she been before this? "Where did you find her?" she asked, voice low. "In the woods," Thomas replied. His voice was rough, dry. "Near the pass." Alone, he nodded once. That was all. She brought him the cup. His hands, large and cracked from work, trembled as he took it. The baby let out a soft cry, and Mara turned to her, quickly lifting her gently from the chair. She pressed the child against her chest, instinct guiding her. The warmth seemed to calm the baby almost instantly. "She has your eyes," Mara said without thinking. Thomas looked up sharply but said nothing. He drained the cup in 2 gulps and set it down hard on the table. "She's not mine," he muttered. Finally, the words hung there. Mara turned, rocking gently. "You don't know that." He let out a dry laugh, bitter and quiet. "Sarah was already... She had someone else. Before she came back. I never asked." And now his eyes darkened. "Now it doesn't matter. She's gone. And the baby's here. That's all." Mara stared at him. The pain in his voice wasn't just fresh, it was unfinished. Like he'd never gotten the chance to grieve. The baby stirred in her arms and Mara looked down. "She needs a name. She doesn't have one. That's not right." He looked at her, then finally, "You want to name her Mara?" Hesitated. "Not unless you want me to." He didn't answer. Outside, thunder cracked closer now. The storm wasn't letting up. "I suppose you'll need a place to sleep," she said finally. "I'm not staying," he replied. "You'll be lucky if the river doesn't sweep your horse away by morning." He paused, jaw clenched. "One night." She nodded. He crossed the room and lifted the baby from her arms. She fussed, then settled against his chest. He turned slightly away from Mara, cradling the child with surprising gentleness. "I'll take the floor," he said. "There's a cot in the back room." He didn't move. Mara exhaled and stepped away. The fire popped and crackled, and the silence returned. She watched him from the corner of her eye. So much pain, so much left unsaid. Sarah had run from something or someone, and now she was gone. But the baby remained, and so did Thomas. The storm outside grew louder, but the storm inside, that little cabin, had just begun. If you believe that love can grow from what's been broken, hit subscribe, because this story is only just beginning. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a world washed clean and silent. The fire in Mara's hearth had burned low, but inside the cabin, warmth lingered. Thomas had barely slept, rocking the infant through the night, while Mara brewed weak tea and kept the silence between them soft. When the sun finally crested over the Sierra ridgeline, Thomas stood cradling the child. "I should take him home," he said quietly. "He needs his own place." Familiar sounds. "My land's not much, but it's his." Mara, still in her robe, looked at the sleeping child, and then at Thomas. "You can't do it alone." "I never asked you to." "No," she said, "but I'm offering." She didn't press further. She simply packed a small bag and gathered her hair back with a ribbon, faded from years of use. And when Thomas saddled the horse, she wrapped the baby carefully, climbed up behind him, and they rode off together, away from her quiet cabin and toward a place neither fully understood. The house wasn't far, a modest structure, tucked behind a thicket of wind-burnt pines, its roof sagging slightly, the porch weathered by years of fog and snow. This was Thomas's land, and it carried the weight of something unfinished. Mara stepped inside first, holding Theo. She didn't speak of the dust or the cold, or the faint smell of firwood and loneliness that lingered in the corners. She only asked where the baby should sleep. Thomas showed her to the small back room. It was supposed to be a study, he muttered. Mary picked the curtains. Mara didn't flinch. She only laid the child down and began to hum. Outside, snowmelt dripped from the eaves. Inside, the past began to loosen its grip. Thomas hadn't spoken much after taking the cot. He rose early, fed the baby formula. He mixed awkwardly in the kitchen and sat beside the window, with her swaddled against his chest. Mara moved around him silently, careful not to make assumptions. "You're not staying," he said, eyes still on the fog-drenched ridge. She glanced up from the hearth. "I never said I was. I just need someone to watch her while I work. That's all." "Not a wife?" she asked softly. He looked at her then, finally, with a tightness in his jaw. "Especially not that." Mara nodded. She didn't argue. She'd heard that tone before, in sutures and fathers burying their sons and widowers, who still clung to the memory of what used to be. "I can stay a few days," she said, "until the road clears. I won't ask for more." He gave a short nod, his gaze falling back to the window. That afternoon, Mara ventured into town for supplies. Cold glances met her at every corner. Some remembered her face from another time, when she wore rouge and silk instead of linen and wool. The general store was quiet, except for the scratching of pencil on ledger. She avoided eye contact with the man behind the counter. "I heard you took up matchmaking," he said without looking up. "I did." He sniffed. "Hell of a thing. From bedsheets to weddings." She didn't answer. There was no point. Outside, a woman stood waiting by her buggy. Abigail Moreland, once a client, now a bitter name in Mara's memory. She smiled thinly. "Heard you're staying out at Crane's place," Abigail said. "That baby his?" Mara ignored the bait. "It's none of your concern." "Maybe not, but it'll be the town soon enough." She stepped around Abigail, jaw tight. The woman's voice followed her like burrs. "Still playing house with men who bury their wives." "Huh?" Mara didn't flinch. Not until she was behind the reins again. Back at the cabin, the baby was crying. Loud, piercing, inconsolable. Thomas stood near the crib, red-eyed and helpless. "She won't stop," he muttered. Mara scooped the baby into her arms, humming low, slow. The child nestled against her shoulder and quieted within minutes. Thomas watched, arms folded, face unreadable. "You have a way," he said quietly. "I've cared for others' children," she replied. "It doesn't make me their mother." "Still," he said, "you're the only one she settles for." That night, Mara cooked stew while Thomas chopped firewood outside. The silence between them was no longer sharp. It had softened like old cloth. They didn't speak much, but when they did, it was without armor. On the third day, a small boy with muddy boots and a slingshot arrived on the porch. "Is the baby here?" he asked, peering around Mara's skirts. Thomas came up behind him. "This is Emmett. He lives down the ridge. Used to bring us eggs," Thomas added. Before Sarah." The unspoken word. Mara knelt. "Theo's sleeping now. But you can come in if you're quiet." Emmett nodded, solemn-faced. He tiptoed inside and perched near the crib like a watchful cat. He returned the next day, and the one after that. He made Theo smile for the first time. Mara watched them, her heart aching in ways she hadn't expected. She wasn't a mother, but something in her reached for it. She caught Thomas watching her more often, now soft glances like a man checking a wound he wasn't sure had healed. But the town hadn't forgotten either of them. One evening, Thomas returned from the ridge with a bruised cheek. "Finch again?" Mara asked. He nodded, spitting blood into the sink. "Wants the north pasture. Says I owe him." "For what?" "For letting my wagon block his mine trail when Sarah died." Mara stiffened. He can't take your land. Thomas gave a bitter smile. He can if I vanish. Are you planning to vanish? His eyes met hers. Depends if I've got anything worth staying for. Her throat tightened. She turned back to the stove. But the world outside didn't wait for healing. Abigail Moreland began whispering again in church pews, in markets wherever ears turned quickly. She was a whore once Mara overheard. Now she sells love legally. Clever trick. She's trying to steal Sarah's man, another woman added. Mara didn't confront them. She had no ground to stand on. Her past was written in too many ledgers. But she started waking up at night, listening for whispers that weren't there. Thomas noticed. Bad dreams, old memories, she whispered. He didn't press. And every night, Theo cried at exactly midnight. And every night, it was Mara who rose, who walked, who whispered lullabies into the quiet. Thomas began leaving her tea by the rocker each morning. She never saw him do it. One afternoon she found Emmett sitting on the porch sketching something on a flat stone. What's that? She asked. It's us, he said. You and me, Thomas, and the baby. I drew the big tree too. She looked closer. 4 stick figures under a wide leafless tree. The baby was smiling. You drew me with a dress, she noted. Well, Emmett said, you always wear one. She smiled, but inside something trembled. Later that night, she stared at the drawing by candlelight. She had come to escape her past. But maybe, just maybe, something new had started growing from its ashes. The attic was colder than the rest of the house. Mara had gone up there looking for extra linens. Thomas had mentioned an old trunk somewhere under the eaves, but what she found was something else entirely. Dust danced in the single shaft of morning light, and the wooden floor creaked underfoot as she scanned the forgotten contents of a man's unfinished life. Behind a pile of old bridles and oil lanterns, half tucked beneath a moth-eaten saddle blanket, sat a weathered tin box. It was small, the size of a biscuit tin. Its edges dented the paint, flaked with time. Mara hesitated, hand on the lid. Something about it felt sacred or dangerous. She opened it. Inside lay a bundle of letters, their paper yellowed and all tied together with a frayed blue ribbon. Her breath caught. The handwriting on the first envelope was unmistakable. Mara Densmore. Her sister. Mara sat down hard on a nearby crate, heart pounding in her throat. Hands trembling, she untied the ribbon and began to read. The letters were intimate, emotional journal entries addressed to no one, but written as though Thura had meant them to be found. Or maybe she hadn't. Some were filled with joy, speaking of wildflowers and the scent of hay in the wind. Others were dark, clouded with fear. Then came the final letter, unsent, unsealed. If something happens, I want someone to know. I think I'm pregnant. I haven't told Thomas. I don't know if it's his. I don't even know if I want it. I've made mistakes, Mara. Big ones. I'm scared he'll hate me. I'm scared I'll ruin everything. Mara folded the letter with slow precision, her hands no longer shaking. The air around her seemed to thicken. Her sister had died alone in the woods, with a newborn in her arms. And now, the truth, raw and undeniable, lay before her. Theo wasn't just any child. He was her nephew. For a long while, Mara sat in silence, staring at the letters. Part of her wanted to rush down and confront Thomas, to demand why he had never told her. But another part, the quieter, steadier one, whispered that maybe he hadn't known either. Or maybe he had. She closed the box and brought it downstairs, stashing it behind her sewing kit, beneath the stairs. That night, smoke woke her. It was thick and acrid, curling beneath the door like a living thing. Mara sprang from bed, coughing, and flung open her door. Orange light flickered through the windows. She raced downstairs just as Thomas stormed in from outside. "The barn!" he yelled. "Finch," he said it. Mara grabbed Theo, already wrapped in a blanket by the hearth, and rushed outside. The barn was ablaze, flames clawing at the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. The horses were gone. Thomas had gotten them out just in time, but the structure was lost. He stood panting in the yard, fists clenched, face streaked with soot. Mara approached him slowly. "We'll rebuild." He didn't answer right away, just looked at her with something raw in his eyes. "Why are you still here?" She paused, her voice low. "Because someone has to be." They spent the next 3 days rebuilding what they could. Thomas worked with a furious silence, hammering and sawing from dawn to dusk. Mara helped cutting timber, holding beams, cooking for them both. They didn't talk much, but something had shifted. He let her see him exhausted. Let her see him angry. And when the day was done and the baby asleep, they sat on the porch shoulder to shoulder, without needing to fill the silence. One evening, as she returned from fetching water, Abigail Moreland was waiting at the edge of the yard. "Well," Abigail said with a smirk. Still playing house, Mara set the bucket down slow and deliberate. "This is not your concern." "Oh, but the whole town is watching, dear. You think they've forgotten who you were, who you still are." Mara's eyes narrowed. "People change. Maybe. But reputations don't." Abigail stepped closer, voice lowering to a hiss. "You think because you're taking care of some bastard child that people will forget the men you warmed beds for?" Mara didn't flinch. "Leave." "I will," Abigail said, turning. "But they won't." That night, Mara sat beside Theo's crib long after he'd fallen asleep. The moonlight slanted across the floor, casting long shadows that reminded her of jail bars. She rose quietly, went to the hiding spot beneath the stairs, and pulled out the tin box. She opened it and retrieved something she hadn't noticed before, a small cloth bundle wrapped in tissue paper. Unfolding it, she found a faded piece of pink ribbon. It was stained at the edges, soft with time. It must have been wrapped around Theo when he was born. She brought it back to the crib and tied it gently to one of the slats, right above where his little hand twitched in sleep. Her voice broke as she whispered, "You are wanted. You always were." Behind her, the floor creaked. Thomas stood there, arms folded, watching. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Later that night, as wind hissed softly against the window panes and the last of the fire dwindled to embers, Mara finally asked the question she'd held too long. "Did you know?" He looked at her. "Know what?" "That he wasn't yours." Thomas lowered his gaze. "I suspected." "Why didn't you say anything?" He shrugged, voice low. "Because it didn't matter. She died with him in her arms. I was the only one left." Mara exhaled. "I found her letters." She was scared. She didn't know what to do. "I know," he said. "I've read them too." Something in her heart softened, because pain shared was pain halved. She nodded slowly, and they sat in silence again. And just for a moment, the house didn't feel quite so heavy. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine, and something else, hope maybe, or the faintest promise of spring. It began with a cough. Mara had gone to market for the first time in weeks, hoping the townspeople might forget the last round of whispers. She'd taken only a few coins and come back with less. When she stepped into the cabin just past dusk, Theo was wrapped in a blanket by the hearth, his cheeks pale, breath shallow. Thomas knelt beside him, one hand resting lightly on the baby's chest, as if willing him to breathe deeper. His eyes found Mara's, frantic. "He started wheezing an hour ago," Thomas said. "He won't take milk." His skin. Mara rushed to him, her hand flying to Theo's forehead. Heat radiated off him like a furnace. "He's burning up." And outside, the wind had started to howl. The storm rolled in fast. Within an hour, the cabin shook under the weight of snow and wind, the shutters rattling like bones. Mara wrapped Theo tighter in flannel, trying every home remedy she knew, herbs steeped in tea, cold cloths pressed to his head, soft lullabies that no longer calmed. Thomas paced. He needs a doctor. Or a preacher. There's no writing in this. I'll go on foot if I have to. You'll freeze before you're halfway there. He stopped mid-stride, turning to her with walled eyes. Then what? Let him burn. Silence filled the room, broken only by Theo's ragged breathing. Mara looked at him. There's one place we might go, but it's not a doctor. Thomas didn't ask. He didn't have to. The old parsonage stood at the edge of town just past the churchyard. It belonged to Reverend Grover, a kind man with an ill wife who rarely left her bed. He and his wife had taken Mara in once long ago after her escape from her former life. But after Abigail's recent campaign to smear her name, she hadn't dared return. Until now. Thomas saddled the mare with trembling hands, wrapped Theo tightly against his chest, and mounted. Mara wrapped herself in a cloak, her boots already soaked, as snow pelted them like stones. It took them nearly an hour through the blizzard, both of them clinging to the mare like lifelines, Thomas shielding Theo from the worst of the wind. Mara clutched the saddle horn until her fingers went numb. When they reached the parsonage, Reverend Grover answered the door with a lantern in hand, and no questions in his eyes. He ushered them in, built a fire, and stepped aside. I'll let the Lord do the rest, he murmured. Mara stayed. She sponged Theo's forehead, rocked him through his fever, whispered to him, until her voice cracked. Thomas sat on the floor, boots off, arms limp, his usual armor of silence worn thin. The firelight flickered gold and red against the old wooden walls. Thomas hadn't spoken in hours. But then, as Mara laid Theo gently into a cradle by the fire, he spoke. I lied, he sighed. Mara turned. His voice was rough, worn from more than just wind and cold. I told you I was drunk the night Sarah died. That's what the town believes. What I let them believe. She stayed quiet, giving him space. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't even in the cabin. She ran. Mara blinked. Ran. She was in labor, early. I told her to wait to let me ride for the doctor. But she was afraid. I think she felt ashamed. Or maybe she didn't want me to see her like that. I don't know. His fists clenched. I found her the next morning, a mile from the ridge. She'd wrapped the baby in her shawl, held him tight until the end. Mara's knees went weak. She sank beside the fire, facing him. She was always scared, Mara said softly, even as a child. Thomas looked at her, pain naked in his eyes. I buried her with my own hands. I didn't tell anyone the truth. I didn't think they'd believe me. And maybe part of me thought I deserved their scorn. Mara didn't speak. She reached across the space between them and laid her hand on his. And then she said the thing she'd been holding too. I know Theo is my blood. His eyes widened. I read the last letter. From the tin box. She admitted it might not be yours. Thomas looked away. I wanted to tell you, Mara whispered. But I was afraid. Afraid it would ruin whatever this is. He nodded once, slowly. It doesn't change anything. She leaned in, forehead resting against his. It changes everything. But maybe that's not bad. A whimper broke the moment. They both turned to the cradle. Theo stirred. He wasn't burning anymore. Still weak, but cooler now, cheeks less flushed. Mara moved first, lifting him with practiced arms. Thomas stood, taking a trembling breath. She placed Theo in his arms. Together they stood there, a child between them. And for the first time, no secrets. From the shadows of the hallway, a small figure watched. Emmett. He'd come with his father to deliver firewood to the parsonage and wandered in when he saw the mare tied out front. He didn't speak, just crept closer, wide-eyed. Thomas noticed him, then bent slightly and whispered, Want to say hi to Theo? The boy nodded, stepped forward and gently touched Theo's tiny hand. "He looks better," Emmett said. "Not so red." Mara smiled. "He's strong, like someone I know." Thomas met her gaze. Later that night, after Reverend Grover offered them the spare room to rest, Thomas and Mara sat on the porch beneath the awning. Snow still fell, but softer now, blanketing the world in hush. "Why did you come with me?" Thomas asked. "Because you asked," she replied. "And if I hadn't, I would have come anyway." He reached for her hand. This time she didn't pull away. The storm wasn't gone, not yet. But inside the circle of lantern light, a different kind of warmth grew. A fragile, dangerous hope. And for once, neither of them turned away. Theo lived. The fever broke just before dawn like a spell released. His breaths grew stronger, color returned to his cheeks, and by midday, the child was babbling softly in Mara's arms. The snow outside, which had piled high during the night, began to melt in long rivulets down the roof. But the thaw in the air did not ease the weight in Mara's chest. She packed quietly, folding her shawl, her spare dress, the small silver brush she'd carried since Kansas City. She didn't tell Thomas she was leaving, not in words, but the way she moved told him everything. "I'll head back east," she said finally. "There's no place here for someone like me." Thomas sat near the hearth, Theo asleep against his shoulder. "There's no one here who's more needed than you." Mara shook her head. "I was a matchmaker, Thomas. I helped people find where they belong. But I never stayed long enough to find mine." Thomas didn't argue. He didn't know how to stop her. Not until he opened the tin box again. He had gone to the attic looking for Theo's rattle and found the box, instead right where Mara had left it. Most of the letters inside were yellowed, creased with time, but one was folded differently. Unopened, unread. He turned it over. There in delicate script was written, "For both of you." He hesitated only a moment before opening it. "My dear Mara and Thomas, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And I'm sorry for the way I left you both, with confusion, with anger, and with silence. I've never been good at saying the things that matter, so I wrote them instead. No one is to blame for what happened. Not me, not Thomas, not Mara. Life is a wild horse we sometimes can't hold on to, right? But I believe in something even stronger than pain, Grace. Thomas, you were always kinder than you believed. I trusted you with my heart, and I trust you now with my son. Mara, you were my light when we were children. I always envied your fire, your courage. I ran when I should have stayed, but if I had one wish for my son, it would be that he knew you, that he saw in you the strength I never could live up to. Please raise him together. You're not just his guardians, you're his beginning." Thomas held the letter in both hands, the edges trembling. Then he stood. It took him an hour to saddle the mare and find her trail. The snow was still thick in patches along the mountain's edge, the wind sharp, but he didn't care. He rode fast, the letter folded in his coat pocket, the words pressing against his chest like a heartbeat. He found her near the ridge. She was standing at the edge of the bluff, her figure wrapped in her cloak, hair loose in the wind. Below the valley, stretched wide, the last of winter melting into spring. "Mara." She turned slowly. "I thought you'd already gone," she said. "I almost let you." She looked away. "You don't owe me anything." Thomas dismounted, walking slowly toward her. "I don't want to owe you. I want to choose you." She didn't speak. "I read the letter," he said. Her breath caught. "She trusted us both," Thomas said. "She saw what we didn't. That this wasn't some accident or burden. She was always better at seeing things clearly." "I don't need a match, Mara," he said softly. "I need the woman who stayed with me through the worst days of my life, who held my son like he was hers, who never asked for anything, but gave everything anyway." He reached into his coat and pulled out the letter, holding it out. She called us. His beginning. Mara took it, hands trembling. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. I thought I was just another piece in someone else's story, she whispered. You are the story, he said. And in that moment, nothing more needed to be said. They returned together, not with trumpets or declarations, but with a quiet surety that could weather storms. Theo greeted them with a sleepy smile and outstretched arms. Emmett ran circles around them both, already asking what was for supper. The days that followed were slow and steady. Mara unpacked. Thomas built a new fence post. Together they mended the burned barn. There were still hard days, still quiet wounds, but the house no longer echoed with grief. One afternoon, while Theo napped in the sunshine by the hearth, Thomas and Mara buried the tin box beneath a lone pine tree out back. They didn't speak while they dug. But before Thomas placed the lid back on, Mara added something new, a small ribbon once wrapped around Theo's newborn wrist. They covered the box with soil and planted daffodils nearby. Let the roots take hold, Thomas said. Let them remember, Mara added. Weeks later, a photographer came to town. Mara didn't want to go at first, but Thomas insisted. One photo, he said, so he never has to wonder where he came from. They dressed in their best, Mara in a blue dress, Thomas in a freshly pressed shirt. Emmett stood beside them, grinning wide. Theo wriggled in Mara's lap. The photographer counted aloud. 3, 2, and just before the shutter clicked, Thomas reached over and took Mara's hand. The photograph captured more than their faces. It caught a family formed not by blood, but by choice, by grief survived, by love earned. Back home, Mara placed the photo above the hearth. She looked at it for a long time. This is the life I never thought I'd get, she whispered. Thomas came up behind her, arms wrapping around her waist. It's the one we made, he said. Outside, the last frost thawed beneath a ski gone soft with spring. Inside, the warmth lingered, not just from the fire, but from the people who stayed. And there, between the laughter of children and the scent of pine, the story ended. Not in ashes, but in roots.